The piece that we're featuring on your anniversary year is Catching Light. So I wonder if you could just bring us back and tell us a little bit about your inspiration for that and how that came about.
Well, as I remember it, Linda Reichert had the idea to do a concert on the concept of dark and light and asked me if I wanted to contribute a piece concerned with light in some way. I would say my music tends towards the darker side of things, so I found this a challenge. I began by looking up the word light and found that there are many, many words that define or describe different types of light. I eventually ended up choosing 3, flickering, shimmering, and burning as the basis for a 3-movement work for 6 players. I also sought to make the piece lighter in character as well.
So the concert that I think you're referring to was called The Heart of Light and Dark.
That's it.
And then yours is like it's a signature piece in that. And so when you were looking up this light, you're saying that you're using these musical metaphors of flickering, shimmering, and burning.
Right. They're more like points of departure, I dare say. That just go on into fantasies about what flickering could be. Even flickering getting out of control and then coming back into flickering. Yeah, so they're just points of departure, I dare say.
Yeah, so could you tell us just, while you're preparing to write the piece, getting your mind set and maybe starting to think of some of the musical materials, turning those metaphors into music. Tell us a little bit about your compositional process.
Well, I think in recent years, I've more and more worked from one measure to the next, making each measure in order, rarely working ahead, sort of like building a wall, laying the first layer of bricks, then the next, and then the next. If measure 3 isn't right, I can't seem to find measure 4, or at least one that I end up keeping. This creates, I think, a kind of organic type of music that's rather Baroque in nature, in the way it spins itself out, what the German musicologists called Fortspinnung. I sometimes get an idea where the music is going to go, but if I try to write that place in ahead of time, it's rarely the right thing when I get to it. This is generally not the recommended way of composing, but this is how I work best now. I try to let the piece tell me where it wants to go and to stay out of the way of that process, which is not always an easy thing to do. At least that's what writers and other composers tell me as well. So, as I was saying, this also means that a concept like flickering is a point of departure that leads to stretching a concept into a series of fantasies. In this piece, inevitably, the other 2 movements, shimmering and burning, share some of the same musical materials, just as all 3 concepts share light and movement.
Excellent. So what I'd like to do is maybe just take a listen to a few of the spots in Catching Light. So why don't you prepare us for that opening arpeggio and that just opening section that we hear in the first movement, in Flickering. Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, many of my pieces begin with an upward arpeggio. Some would say I'm not imaginative enough, but for me it's rather like raising the curtain on a performance. Sometimes the arpeggio is generated from a 12-tone row and sometimes even from a famous row, as in this case, but I'm afraid I don't remember which one now that I used to get started, partly because I sometimes change a note here and there, and after establishing the opening idea, the pitch selection is freer. It's not 12-tone at all.
Excellent. So let's take a moment and listen to that together. So that was from the opening movement of Catching Light. Anything more you want to add to that?
Well, the fact that many of my pieces start with an upward arpeggio is not accidental, really. To me, it's rather like Monet's many paintings of haystacks at various times of the day. I've been interested in seeing how you can start from the same place and then end up going to different places, like starting trips from your front door that lead to different destinations. Um, Not long after composing Catching Light, for example, I wrote another piece for the same group of instruments called Afterlight that very consciously sought to do just that, to begin similarly and let the music find a different path, a different manifestation.
Ah, that's really interesting because I think there's a lot of composers who, even though they reach the doubled bar, they haven't reached the end of the ideas or the end of the composition. And I
Mm.
quite like the idea of companion pieces
Mm,
and having it overlap.
right. And, over the course of music history, a lot of composers take multiple pieces to work out an idea, like those quickening endings that happen in Beethoven piano sonatas. So
Sure.
the Opus 53, the Waldstein, Opus 54, Opus 57, they all have those speeding ups at the end. So he's sort of
Yes.
working that idea out over a number of pieces.
Yes. Now the second movement. Tell us a little bit about the shimmering.
Well, after finishing flickering, I had to make sure that I had some difference between flickering and shimmering. And the initial image, and there were a lot of images, obviously, that floated through my head, was if you sit by a pond and all of a sudden the light catches the top of the water and you see a little bit of movement, etc. So that's really the opening of that, and then just this kind of fluttering, if you will, which happens on a surface, was really the main thing, and it will eventually reach a climax of shimmering, almost where it's too much for the eye,
Hmm.
um, and then comes back down again.
That was from the second movement of Catching Light. And as I was looking through the score, there was something in there that I found really interesting, that you had what's called an eraser strum.
Ah.
Could you tell us what that is?
Yeah, I've used this effect as like many composers, where you hold down the notes silently on the piano and then you strum the strings inside. Um, I've found that that sound does not project very well if you just do it with the finger flesh. If you use the nail, then it's too metallic sounding. So using some kind of a rubber eraser gives something which is projects much better without being abrasive sounding.
That's a really beautiful effect. And I
Yeah.
can't wait till we can all come together and hear that. Now, that last movement, tell us a little bit about the last movement before we listen to this.
Well, so by the time I got to the third movement, burning needed to be the most intense, obviously, the most constant in terms of its forward rhythm. Um, and so, but it also had to build from one place to another. So it starts out with sparks, you might say, little shooting things in the piano, etc. And then it comes to a kind of a thing where it's like roiling and keeps going. And I always hear that as a kind of a Prokofiev moment, something like the end of the third piano concerto, when it keeps going. So.
Excellent. Let's take a listen to that together. So Jan, this concert that we're featuring Catching Light on is celebrating your 30th anniversary as the conductor of the network Ensemble. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how conducting the ensemble has influenced your composition.
Well, first of all, let me thank Network for presenting this concert. It has been a great honor to be associated with Network for all these years. With Linda, with you, and with incredible players. It really is a great honor for me to be able to look back on this time together with Network. To get to your question, I guess I would say that I've learned to be more practical and sensitive as a result of being a conductor. Conducting has taught me to be kinder to the players, not to ask more of them than is needed for any effect that I might want. Some of my music tends towards virtuosity, and that has to be carefully considered so it is as idiomatic and enjoyable as possible. The best virtuoso music, I think, is music that sounds harder than it really is. Many years ago, I wrote a piece that was the opposite, harder than it sounded, and I still hear about it from one of the players. Writing a piece that's enjoyable and interesting to play is also important. There are many pieces competing for performance these days, so players will tend to pick those that put them and the composer in the best light. On the other hand, players don't mind a challenge if it's a good piece and therefore well worth their time and effort. What I've learned, however, doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes. Mahler conducted all that time and yet still revised the orchestrations of his pieces after hearing them. So.
That's great, Jan. And I certainly think that this is definitely an enjoyable piece to listen to, and I think it's going to bring great joy to the people who are playing it and listening to it. So we're all really looking forward to this concert and to celebrating with you.